In a quiet village in central Java, surrounded by rice fields and the distant sound of prayer calls, lived a widow named Karsa. Her life was a patchwork of sacrifices stitched together by patience and faith. Ever since her husband's death several years ago, she had carried the weight of survival alone. Each day began before sunrise, when the mist still hugged the trees and the air smelled of damp soil. She would rush from one job to another, planting rice in the fields, washing dishes at neighbors' houses, helping during weddings, or sweeping dusty yards, anything that could earn her enough to buy food for herself and her only child. But poverty was merciless. The coin she earned never seemed enough. The price of rice rose. Her child's school fees grew higher. Still, Karsi never gave up. She often said to herself, "If my son studies well, maybe one day he will lift us out of this misery." Her wrinkled hands and tired eyes carried an unshakable hope. Yet as nights passed and the sound of crickets filled her small bamboo hut, she found herself staring at the ceiling, worrying how she would manage tomorrow. One afternoon, her neighbor, a woman named Sumi, returned from working abroad. Dressed neatly, wearing gold bangles and carrying gifts, Sumi looked transformed. "Karsi," she said kindly, "why don't you try going overseas like me? There's plenty of work there, like cleaning, cooking. It's hard, but the pay is good." Karsi hesitated. "Leave my child?" "How could I?" she whispered. But that night, she couldn't sleep. Her son deserved a chance, and she knew it wouldn't come by staying where she was. Weeks later, she made her decision. She sold her old sewing machine to pay for the paperwork and entrusted her son to her elderly mother. The day of her departure arrived under a cloudy sky. Her little boy clung to her legs, crying uncontrollably. "Mother, don't go," he pleaded. Karsi knelt down, holding his small face in her palms. "My son," she said through trembling lips, "I am going so you can have a better life. Be strong for me." Tears rolled down their cheeks as the bus engine started. Every sound, every movement felt like a knife cutting through her heart. When the plane finally took off, she looked out the window, watching the fading outline of her homeland. She whispered a prayer. She wasn't chasing wealth, only survival, only the dream of seeing her son smile without worry. After a long journey, she arrived in a distant desert land, a place of foreign tongues, strange food, and endless golden sand. There she was assigned to work for Sheikh Abdullah, an elderly, wealthy widower known for his stern nature and silent composure. The mansion she entered was grand, shimmering with marble floors and tall archways. Yet it felt lifeless, a house full of echoes but devoid of warmth. As Karsi bowed her head and began sweeping the marble floor, she whispered quietly, "This is where my new life begins." She didn't know that in this cold house, fate was silently preparing a love story that would one day warm two lonely hearts. The first few days in Sheikh Abdullah's mansion felt like walking inside a dream made of glass, beautiful but fragile, where every sound echoed and every mistake could shatter the calm. The ceilings were high, adorned with gold carvings. The marble floors were polished to a mirror-like shine. Yet to Karsi, all that grandeur felt heavy, lifeless, and cold. She was used to the laughter of neighbors, the smell of rain-soaked soil, and the sound of her child's voice. Here, silence ruled every corner like a ghost. Sheikh Abdullah rarely spoke. His footsteps were measured, his tone always firm. "Karsi," he would say in his deep voice, "the dining room must be spotless." Or, "Prepare my tea after prayer." Never once did he raise his voice, but his presence was commanding enough to make her tremble. She obeyed every instruction with care, bowing her head respectfully each time. In the evenings, when the call to prayer echoed faintly from the nearby mosque, the mansion would fall into an even deeper silence. Karsi often sat alone in the kitchen, the flickering light of a single bulb illuminating her weary face. Her hands smelled of soap and spices, her back ached, but her mind wandered far away to the little boy sleeping on a thin mat in her village. Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. "I hope you're eating well tonight, my son," she whispered to the wind. One night, as she sat by the window staring at the moon, Sheikh Abdullah happened to walk by. He paused at the door and saw her wiping her eyes. For a long second, he said nothing. Then in a low tone that surprised even him, he asked, "Do you miss home?" Startled, Karsi quickly stood up, bowing her head. Yes, Sheikh. Every night, she replied softly. He nodded once. You are a strong woman, he said simply before walking away. That short exchange lingered in her heart like a spark in the dark. For the first time, his words felt human, not commanding. The next morning, when she brought him breakfast, his tone was slightly gentler. The tea is good, he said after a pause. Karsi has smiled faintly but said nothing. Day after day, little gestures began to change. He would sometimes ask about her homeland, about the food she missed, or about the weather in Indonesia. At first, she answered timidly, but slowly, her words became longer, her tone softer. Though the sheikh remained distant, there was warmth beneath his cold shell, a warmth that only needed a reason to rise. Karsi didn't realize it then, but her sincerity was melting the silence of that mansion. The house no longer felt haunted, the air no longer felt heavy. For the first time when she cleaned the rooms and sang softly to herself, her voice didn't echo back emptily. It stayed, gently filling the home with something new, life. And somewhere in that silence, two lonely hearts had unknowingly begun to listen to each other. Weeks passed quietly, and the rhythm of life in Sheikh Abdullah's mansion slowly became familiar to Karsai. Each morning before dawn, she would rise to prepare breakfast, soft bread, tea with mint and honey. After the sheikh left for the mosque, she would clean the house from corner to corner, her movements neat and practiced. The sound of her broom brushing against the marble floors became part of the mansion's melody. Though her body grew tired, her heart found peace in routine. One afternoon, Sheikh Abdullah called out from the living room. Karsi, he said, his voice calm but commanding. I wish to taste a dish from your country. Something your people eat often. The request surprised her. From my country, Sheikh? She asked timidly. Yes, he nodded. I've had guests from Indonesia who spoke fondly of your food. I wish to know what makes it special. Her heart warmed with a mix of pride and anxiety. I will try, Sheikh, she said softly. That night, she decided to make sayur lodeh, a traditional vegetable stew her late mother used to cook. But when she went to the market, many of the ingredients were missing: coconut milk, jackfruit, and small eggplants. None of them were available. Confused and hesitant, she returned to the mansion and stood at the doorway. Sheikh, I can't find the ingredients I usually use, she explained politely. May I look in your garden? Perhaps there are vegetables I can use instead. The sheikh looked up from his reading and nodded. Go. Take whatever you need. The garden is full of blessings. Karsi walked into the back garden, where the warm desert wind swayed the tall date palms. The soil was rich and carefully tended, and between the rows of herbs and vines, she saw something strange: an enormous Arabian eggplant, large and shiny, unlike any she had ever seen. She bent down, examining it closely, then chuckled to herself. Oh my, she whispered. If my neighbors saw an eggplant this big, they'd talk about it for weeks. A deep voice startled her. What are you laughing at, Karsi? Sheikh Abdullah had appeared quietly behind her. Flustered, she turned around, blushing. Forgive me, Sheikh. I was just thinking how big this eggplant is. In my village, vegetables were never this impressive. To her surprise, the sheikh laughed, a real, genuine laugh that filled the quiet air. The sound was deep and unfamiliar, and it froze Karsi in place. She had never seen him smile before. From that small, innocent moment, something shifted. The cold tension between them melted into something lighter. That evening, when she served the loda Maid with local vegetables, Sheikh Abdullah ate in silence, then said simply, "It's delicious." And for the first time, when their eyes met, both smiled, not as master and servant, but as two lonely souls who had finally found warmth in each other's presence. From that day onward, something unseen began to grow inside the grand mansion. It wasn't just the scent of spices or the rustle of palm leaves in the courtyard. It was a quiet warmth, a sense of life that had long been missing. The laughter born from the Arab eggplant incident had broken a wall neither of them realized existed. Sheikh Abdullah, once a figure of solemn silence, began to speak more often. In the afternoons, when the sun softened and golden light fell across the tiled floors, He would walk into the garden with a cup of tea and call softly, "Karsi, come sit for a while." At first, she hesitated. Sitting with him felt improper. He was her employer, a man of high status, and she was just a widow from a small village. But his tone carried no command, only kindness. So she would sit at a respectful distance, her hands folded on her lap. Their conversations were simple. He asked about her home, her son, the foods she missed. "What is your favorite dish?" he asked one evening, as the call to prayer echoed in the distance. "Sayur lode," she replied with a shy smile. "It's simple, Sheikh, but it reminds me of home." He gazed at her thoughtfully, then said, "Then teach me how it tastes. Let me feel what home means to you." And those words touched her deeply. For the first time since arriving, Karsi felt seen, not as a worker, but as a human being with memories and emotions. As she cooked, he would sometimes stand nearby, watching quietly, asking questions about ingredients. She found it strange, yet comforting. He had power and wealth, yet behind that stern exterior lived a man carrying his own kind of loneliness. In the evenings, when the work was done, Karsi would hum soft Javanese lullabies while cleaning the dishes. Sometimes she caught the sheikh listening from afar, his expression calm but unreadable. Once, he said quietly, "Your songs remind me of something I've forgotten. Peace." Each day that followed blurred the lines between servant and master a little more. The mansion, once filled only with echoing footsteps, now carried the faint sound of laughter, the clink of shared teacups, and the rhythm of conversation. The other servants noticed too. They whispered among themselves, but Karsi paid them no mind. Her heart, long buried under years of sorrow and fatigue, was beginning to feel alive again. Still, she reminded herself every night before sleeping, "This is not love. It cannot be. He is my employer, and I am here for my son's future." Yet, when she closed her eyes, the image that appeared in her mind was not her son, nor her village, but the face of Sheikh Abdullah, the man who had unknowingly become both her comfort and her confusion. Something forbidden had begun to bloom, quietly, under the desert sun. Days turned into weeks, and the invisible thread between Karsi and Sheikh Abdullah grew stronger. What had started as polite exchanges turned into long, quiet conversations in the garden. They would sit under the shade of the date palms, sipping tea as the afternoon breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the courtyard. The sheikh would talk about his youth, the years of success, his late wife, and the emptiness that followed her death. His eyes often grew distant when he spoke, like a man trapped between memories and regrets. Karsi listened with quiet empathy. She never interrupted, only nodded gently, her heart tightening at his loneliness. She had known loss too, the kind that leaves a void no words can fill. And somehow, sharing that silence felt like healing. Sometimes their talks drifted towards small joys. He asked her about her village, and she would describe the sound of rain falling on bamboo roofs, the laughter of children playing barefoot in the mud, and the smell of fresh coconut milk bubbling over firewood. The sheikh smiled at her stories, the kind of genuine smile that had long abandoned his face. "Your world is simple," he said once. "Maybe that's why it sounds so peaceful." But not everyone in the mansion welcomed this newfound closeness. The servants began to notice. Whispers floated through the corridors like wind through curtains. "Have you seen how often Sheikh calls her?" one said. "A maid sitting beside the master?" "How improper," said another. Even the neighbors began to murmur. It was scandalous in their eyes. A respected Arab sheikh spending his afternoons with a foreign widow. Karsi could feel the weight of those stares every time she went to the market. The women looked at her with disapproval, and the men with mocking smiles. Each whisper felt like a knife cutting her dignity. At night, she cried silently, afraid that her presence was bringing shame to the very man who had treated her with kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the dunes, Sheikh Abdullah handed her a folded piece of paper. "Read this," he said. Confused, she unfolded it and saw lines of Arabic calligraphy, delicate and flowing like art. "It's a poem," he explained, "for you." I don't understand the words, Sheikh," she whispered, trembling. He smiled gently and translated aloud, "In my lonely home, you came as light. You are not just a worker. You are the wind that woke those words, beautiful yet dangerous, echoed louder than her conscience. The mansion's silence had changed. Where once it was empty, now it pulsed with something unspoken. Their eyes met longer than they should, their smiles lasted a heartbeat too long. The sheikh seemed lighter. He laughed more, ate better, and spent hours in the garden waiting for her stories. Sometimes he would bring her small gifts, a silk scarf, a box of dates, or a bracelet made of pearls. Each time she hesitated before accepting. "Sheikh," she would whisper, "you shouldn't give me such things." "I give them because I want to," he would reply calmly. "Your kindness deserves more than gold." But outside their quiet world, the storm of judgment was growing. The servants' whispers had turned into bold gossip. When Karsi passed, they stopped talking abruptly, their eyes filled with suspicion. The neighbors began to notice too. In their culture, a maid's closeness to her employer was scandalous, almost sinful. One night, after cleaning the dining room, Karsi gathered her courage and approached Sheikh Abdullah. "Sheikh," she said softly, "I think I should leave." He looked up sharply. Leave? Why?" "People are talking," she murmured. "They say I've overstepped my place." "I don't want to cause you shame." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the sheikh rose from his chair and walked toward her. "Do you think I care about their words?" Those words shattered every wall she had built inside her. It was wrong, yet pure. Forbidden, yet divinely written. That night, she wept until dawn. Not because she was ashamed, but because she finally realized she had fallen in love. A love she never sought, but could no longer deny. The following weeks unfolded like a dream, trapped between joy and fear. Sheikh Abdullah and Karsi had grown inseparable. Their conversations stretched longer into the evenings, their silences more meaningful than words. Sometimes they simply sat side by side in the garden, watching the golden desert sky fade into night. The once cold mansion now felt alive, with laughter, the aroma of fresh food, and the rhythm of two hearts finding warmth in each other's presence. But outside those walls, the world had begun to turn against them. The whispers in the market grew sharper, more venomous. "That foreign widow," some sneered, "has bewitched the sheikh." Servants who once admired Karsi now avoided her. Others watched her with open disdain. Even the sheikh's extended family, living in nearby villas, began to send word, subtle at first, then direct. "This is disgraceful. How could a noble man tarnish the family name by entertaining a maid?" Karsi heard it all, though no one dared say it to her face. The weight of their judgment pressed on her like an invisible chain. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. At night, she would sit on her bed and stare at the small photograph of her son, whispering, "Forgive me, my child. I came here to work, not to bring shame." One evening, when the sheikh called her to join him for tea in the courtyard, she hesitated. He noticed immediately. "Karsi," he said softly, "what troubles you?" Her voice trembled. "People are talking again, Sheikh. They say I'm not worthy of your kindness, that I've overstepped my place." The sheikh's jaw tightened. "Let them talk." "But they insult you too," she whispered. "I can bear their words, but I cannot bear the thought of you being mocked because of me." He took a deep breath, his eyes darkening with resolve. "I've lived most of my life obeying others. Society, family, traditions. And yet none of them filled the emptiness inside me. You did, Karsi. You brought peace back to my heart. If loving you is a disgrace, then let me live in disgrace." Her tears fell silently. She wanted to believe him, but fear still clung to her soul. She bowed her head and murmured, "Perhaps it's better if I return home. This place, it isn't mine." The sheikh looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You think leaving will silence them?" "No, my dear, it will only silence you. They'll still talk. They always will." He turned toward the horizon where the call to prayer echoed faintly. "But I am not a man who hides from truth. I will not lose you to their poison." Those words struck deep within her. She had never met a man willing to stand against his world for her. Yet, deep inside, she feared that the storm gathering around them would soon demand a price that neither love nor courage could easily pay. That night, Karsi barely slept. The Sheikh's words kept echoing in her mind, "I will not lose you to their poison." They were strong, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. She sat by her small window, watching the moonlight spill across the courtyard, her heart tangled in a web of love and guilt. She knew what they shared was pure, but the world refused to see it that way. Every whisper, every stare reminded her that she was a servant, an outsider, a woman from a faraway village who had crossed an invisible line. By dawn, she made up her mind. When the sheikh called for tea that morning, she appeared before him with trembling hands. "Sheikh," she began quietly, "I must go home. I came here to work, not to stay in your life. I don't want people to curse your name because of me." Sheikh Abdullah stared at her, his face unreadable at first. Then, in a voice steady but heavy with pain, he said, "Do you think I care about their words, Karsi? I have lived too long surrounded by people who only care for my wealth. You are the first who ever cared for my heart." "But I'm not like you," she said desperately. "You come from honor, from a respected name. I am just a widow, poor and unworthy." He shook his head. "You speak as if love understands rank and titles. What you've given me is something money could never buy. Peace." Her tears fell freely now. "And yet that peace brings you war with your family." The sheikh walked closer, his eyes filled with determination. "Then let them hear the truth from my own mouth." Later that day, he summoned his entire family, his sons, daughters, and nephews, to the grand living hall. The servant stood frozen at the edges, whispering nervously. Karsi tried to slip away, but he gestured for her to stay. "You belong here," he said firmly. When everyone had gathered, the sheikh rose to speak. His voice, though aged, carried the authority of a man who had nothing left to fear. "My children," he began, "I have spent years in this house, surrounded by wealth but starved of warmth. Then Allah sent me someone who reminded me what it means to live again. Her name is Karsi, and I intend to marry her." The room erupted in disbelief. One of his sons stood up angrily. "Father, she's just a servant. People will laugh at us." The sheikh's voice grew louder. "Enough! Let them laugh. I no longer live for appearances. I live for peace. And she is my peace." Karsi stood there trembling, unable to believe what she was hearing. The room fell silent, and all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. In that moment, she realized this wasn't just his decision, it was his defiance. A man who had once lived in shadows was now standing in light, unafraid to claim the love that the sheikh's declaration spread through the mansion like wildfire. Every servant, every relative, every neighbor seemed to know by the next morning that Sheikh Abdullah was marrying his maid. The shock was immense. For some, it was scandalous, a stain on the family's name. For others, it was a story of rare courage. But for Karsi, it was terrifying. She had never sought this. She had never even dared to dream it. Yet now, fate had placed her at the center of a storm she didn't ask for. The sheikh's children tried to persuade him to change his mind. His eldest son spoke firmly. "Father, think of our reputation. What will people say when they learn you married a maid from another country?" His daughters pleaded too. "We don't want you to be ridiculed, father. Please reconsider." But Sheikh Abdullah remained calm, seated in his armchair like a man carved from stone. "My decision is final," he said. "I have lived long enough to understand that happiness does not come from pride. It comes from sincerity." When Karsi heard this, her heart filled with both gratitude and fear. She had never imagined that someone of his stature would defend her so openly. That evening, as the house quieted, she approached him. "Sheikh," she said softly, "you don't have to do this." "People will never forgive me for it," he smiled gently. "Let them not forgive. I am not marrying you for them. I am marrying you for me." A week later, the wedding took place. It was not a grand celebration filled with guests or gold decorations. Instead, it was intimate and simple, a small gathering of loyal friends, a few humble relatives, and two hearts that had already chosen each other long before the ceremony. Karsi wore a plain, cream-colored dress with a soft veil that fluttered in the desert breeze. The sheikh wore a white robe and a calm smile. When the moment came, his voice trembled slightly as he said, "With this vow, I take you as my wife. Not because of status, but because of what you brought into my soul." Peace, tears streamed down Karsi's cheeks as she whispered the words of acceptance. Around them, the few witnesses smiled warmly while others looked away in disbelief. But none of it mattered anymore. In that moment, every barrier, wealth, language, class, dissolved. News of their marriage soon reached beyond their neighborhood. The story spread across towns and even online. Headlines appeared. Arab sheikh marries his maid, a tale of true love. Some mocked, others admired, but most were moved. As the sun set that evening, Sheikh Abdullah took Karsi's hands in his and said softly, "Let them talk." The world forgets, but peace lasts, and for the first time in years, the mansion, once echoing with silence, filled with something it had never known before, the sound of laughter, warmth, and love that no rumor could ever destroy. After the wedding, the mansion that once echoed with emptiness began to breathe again. The air smelled of life, the aroma of Karsi's village cooking mixing with Arabic spices, the laughter of two souls who had found comfort after years of loneliness. The sheikh, who once lived like a shadow among his riches, now smiled often. He walked slower, spoke softer, and looked at the world with the peace of a man who had finally made peace with himself. Karsi, though now the wife of a respected man, never let pride enter her heart. She still woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, still cleaned the house herself, still spoke with humility to the servants who once looked down on her. But something inside her had changed, not her status, but her spirit. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from being truly loved and respected. At first, some relatives continued to avoid them. Guests who once visited the mansion regularly now stayed away. Yet with time, hearts began to soften. They saw how the sheikh treated her, with dignity, not pity. They saw how the house had become a place of joy again. Slowly, the gossip faded, replaced by quiet admiration. People began to say, perhaps sincerity is a greater nobility than blood." Months later, a piece of joyful news arrived. Karsi was expecting a child. The sheikh, now older but stronger in spirit, wept with gratitude. He prayed longer, smiled wider, and thanked God for giving him another chance at life through this miracle. When the baby was born, a small boy with warm brown skin and soft black curls, the sheikh named him Yusuf Karim, the noble and the beautiful. To him, Yusuf was not just a son. He was a symbol of love that defied judgment, of courage that conquered fear, of faith that crossed nations. Holding the child in his arms, Sheikh Abdullah said, "This child carries both our worlds. He is proof that love can build bridges where walls once stood." The story of their family soon spread beyond borders. Photos of the humble wedding and their mixed heritage baby went viral. News outlets and social media posts carried their tales. From maid to wife, the true story of love beyond boundaries. Many were inspired. People from distant countries wrote messages blessing them, calling their story proof that love is not bound by class, color, or culture. But in the quiet of their nights, far from the noise of fame, they remained simple. Sometimes when the desert wind whispered through the garden, Sheikh Abdullah would hold Karsi's hand and say, "Do you remember that day in the garden? The big eggplant that made you laugh?" She would smile and nod, her eyes glistening. "Yes, Sheikh." That was the day everything changed, and as little Yusuf slept between them, the stars shimmering above, both hearts rested, knowing that love, honest, humble, and fearless, had turned a once cold mansion into a home filled with eternal warmth.